all hits all the time.
We are family.
Next Scherzer double-digit Ks.
We're busting ours to kick yours.
Fun to watch.
Minus 15.
Respect all, fear none.
Into the upper deck.
Intensity is not a curfew.
Oh, mercy.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
From inside our two-bedroom apartment in downtown Baltimore, it is the MASN All-Access Podcast. Paul Mancano, Brendan Mortensen here with you as always. We got a whole heck of a lot to talk about on today's show. We are live, of course, as always, on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. You could be listening to us after the fact. If you are, just tune into us live next time. We'll go starting to get a routine down of doing these shows on Tuesdays now that we're stuck in our homes. So we're also joined, by the way, by Connor Newcomb, as I am running the show, and I made a mistake in terms of running the video on the show. So maybe, just don't tune in live if you're watching.
No, just maybe don't.
Just maybe just listen to the podcast. That's always a good platform as well. But we are got a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about some of the Orioles signings in the international free agent market. We're going to talk about Brandon Klein retiring. We're going to talk about Thomas Eshelman re-signing. A lot of moves on the fringes of the roster. But first, Brendan, we have to address our last couple podcasts because they were the All-Camden Yards draft.
Yeah.
Fun time.
Yeah.
Good time. Two-parter, 18-round draft. Essentially, what we were doing, first off, if you haven't listened to it, you should go back and listen to it. But essentially what we were doing was drafting the best players to have ever played in an Orioles jersey at Camden Yards. And we had three teams. It was you, me, and Connor Newcomb, who I just mentioned, of the Locked On Orioles podcast. And then we put it to you, the voters, to find out who would have the best team of the three of us after we had our rosters filled. And Brendan, the voters spoke.
It was not us.
It was not us. Neither one of us, the two regular hosts of this podcast, took home the victory. It was instead Connor Newcomb. The final votes, I'll read them out. With 59% of the vote, Connor's team, absolutely dominating. 808 votes between Facebook, YouTube. No, there wasn't a YouTube. Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. That's where everybody voted.
Yeah.
My team, solid second place. 23% of the vote, 309. And in a distant third, Brendan's 18%, 239 total votes. Those are the results. Connor Newcomb, champion of the All-Camden Yards draft, and as such, we have allowed him to join us briefly on this podcast for a victory lap, victory speech. Connor, do you have anything prepared?
Yeah, I just want to thank you guys for having me on and letting me come on and humiliate both of you in this draft on your own podcast. And, I was feeling good after one day of voting. I built a giant lead on day one, and I could kind of sit back. I knew my team was the best. I did not know that the people would vote so heavily in my favor that it wouldn't be this close. I expected, more so around 40% of the vote and not 60. But that is what I got. I have to say, looking at the numbers, there's a good argument to be made that Brendan had the best team, and yet he came in third. And
I would also make that argument.
Yeah, okay. It's interesting how the voting went down. And, there are probably certain players that each of you took that cost you a lot of votes. But who knows if I actually had the best team, but I definitely played it right with who I drafted and where the voting was done, and I'll take home that victory.
All right, Connor, you're looking at your roster, reviewing your 18-round draft. It helped that you had the third overall pick, I think, because you had some back-to-back picks in there. I, of course, had the back-to-back picks, but, the first overall pick, the sixth overall pick, there's a lot of time there. If you had to look back at your roster, do you have a best pick, a worst pick that you made in that draft?
I'll start with worst pick. It wasn't terrible. I think the one thing I look back on and say I would have done differently is in the 8th round. I had a pick to end the 7th round, and I took J.J. Hardy, and I had the next immediate pick. And I went with Jonathan Scope as my second baseman. And now, obviously, Jonathan Scope had, a 6-year career with the Orioles, and he put up some really good numbers. But Roberto Alomar was still on the board. And I think the only reason I went with Scope, well, for two reasons. One, obviously more longevity as an Oriole. Alomar only played 3 seasons. And B, as I only half jokingly say, I wanted that team chemistry. I already had a bunch of recent Orioles, so I wanted to put Scope in there as well. But looking back on it, Alomar's 3 years and the peak of his time was better than Scope's, and it might have made my team a little bit better. But on the flip side, my best pick for 2 reasons. One, because it was nice maneuvering of me to get another good bat in my lineup. And 2, because it made Paul so angry. And that would be my 16th round pick of taking Javi Lopez as my DH.
Yeah, that was a tough one to swallow. I think as such, I have to pick my worst pick of that draft being Mike Devereaux in like the 14th or 15th round, because I left Javi Lopez on the board for Connor to scoop him up. Kind of opened the door for that. I thought neither of you guys was going to take advantage of me like that. And little did I know. And that's the reason Connor is appearing on this podcast as a guest and as, a person in the business, but not as a friend. Okay? Not as a friend. Maybe to you, Brendan, but not to me. My best pick, if I'm looking back at my draft, I mean, Mike Messina, number 1, I think is a great pick. But I think I have to go right around that middle rounds, and I think I'm going to go with Roberto Alomar because of what Connor just said. I think I was shocked that he was still on the board when he was there, and I think in reviewing the results of this draft, it helps to have, just in terms of the way that fans vote, I think it helps to have more names that fans know, and I think that we maybe overestimated how much fans would look at how long a guy was in Baltimore. I think a bigger name, even if he wasn't there for as long, kind of attracts attention. I think even though Alomar was only there for 3 years, the fact that he was such a big name helps. And I think in a similar way, Connor maybe benefited with Nelson Cruz, because Nelson Cruz, obviously, just the 1 season, and very productive season, but obviously just the 1 year. Brendan, do you have any... First off, before we get to your regrets, do you have any...
Yeah, I think my best pick was probably Mike Bordick in the 10th round. I think he was far and away... Yeah. Great value. He was far and away the best position player available. It kind of got down to the point where Connor couldn't draft any more position players, and Mike Bordick was just kind of sitting there on the board, so I could wait for him a little bit. I don't know if I had a worst pick. I know I reached on Cal Ripken Jr. 2nd overall because I thought the name value would bring me a little more vote than it did. But
it's Twitter, though. It's Twitter,
right?
It's a younger audience.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is that was my fatal flaw? Is that looking at my team, like Connor alluded to, I'm really not upset about how my draft went. By WAR, I had the best team. I had 10 more WAR than Connor's team. I had 20 more WAR than Paul's team. So overall, I think my team was pretty solid. But I think where I messed up in drafting is that I have a bunch of guys who matched in the 90s and early 2000s, which is cool, but on a team that is getting voted on by social media, that is not really the way to go, to have a bunch of guys who were good in the 90s and early 2000s. And I also took longevity into account, I think, a little bit too much. And rightfully so, I think fans looked at these teams and said, okay, even if we're building for 8 years, if you get 1 World Series ring within those 8 years, fans would take that rather than, 8 years of maybe you're getting bounced in the playoffs in round 2. So I think it's a pretty solid team longevity-wise, and I think I have the best team by WAR, like I said, but I think those are my 2 fatal flaws there.
Yeah, I think, and Connor, you can speak to this, but I think the idea that, Brendan, the unfortunate part about having the 2nd overall pick, Brendan, is that you didn't often have the best player at his position. You probably usually had the 2nd best player at each position, but I saw a lot of comments for Connor's draft about Connor's going to win a lot of games 10-9. And then I saw a lot of comments about my draft of like he stacked pitching, he dominated, in terms of the pitching. And I was definitely pitching heavy. And I think Connor, you would admit that you were obviously lineup heavy. And then Brendan was just kind of in a middle ground where I think you had some good pitchers. You had it was a more balanced team.
I didn't dominate anyone.
But you didn't dominate any one category. And I think that's like it. Weirdly enough, even though that's probably not how you should build a baseball team in general, I think that strategy might have backfired a little bit weirdly.
Yeah, I would agree.
Connor, do you have any more final thoughts before we kick you off this podcast for you to never return?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of add in that I think a lot of it was some recency bias as well. I mean, I had 7 of the 9 guys in my lineup played on the Orioles from 2012, through 2016, the best, most recent years. And you look in my, rotation, I've got 2 of my starters are from that time and 1 of my relievers as well. And you kind of flip to Brendan's roster, who by WAR, yes, had the best team. But you kind of look at that recency bias. I think he had only 4 guys who played in that era, or 5 guys maybe. And, some of those guys like Jim Johnson kind of ended with a bad taste in Orioles fans' mouths when he left. Brian Roberts was hurt during that era and then left and played for the Yankees for 1 year at the end of his career. And then, of course, Chris Davis was good then, but I think that name on the team hurt Brendan a little bit as well, just because a lot of people are going to think current Chris Davis and not 2013 Chris Davis. And maybe recency bias helped me even if I didn't have the best team, but I will take it and I will walk away a winner.
Well, congratulations. Your prize for the winner is absolutely nothing. And but look, this was fun. I think we're going to try to do more things like this. So if you have any ideas, Connor, if you have any ideas of kind of drafts that we want to do, maybe we can get more clever than drafts, but we don't have too many ideas. So,
the drafts are fun.
Drafts
I
are
know
fun.
I had a lot of fun. I think I learned a lot about kind of like the later 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, it was
Orioles
a learning
teams.
experience,
Yeah.
certainly. Like, I mean, I did not grow up an Orioles fan. Brendan, I know you didn't grow up an Orioles fan. So, like, a lot of what we learn about the team is is kind of reading back or watching old videos. And we learned a lot about guys that we did not grow up watching. And I think that it was a great learning experience in that aspect.
Yeah, and if there are any fan ideas about drafts that we could possibly do, we had a great idea. I think a week or 2 weeks ago, somebody commented that we could do players that the Orioles drafted and their production, and we could only draft players that the Orioles drafted. So that was a great idea. And if you have any more, please let us know in the comments.
All right, Connor, you're banished, but thanks so much.
Thank you guys for having me.
Also, be sure to listen to the Locked On Orioles podcast. Real quick, Connor, where can we find that?
The Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Get it wherever you get your pods. We're 3 days a week right now, but as the season gets closer, it'll be daily Orioles content if you want that in your ears.
It's good stuff. Thanks again, Connor.
Thank you.
All right. Well, it's just me and Brendan now at this point. Back on the podcast. We got a lot to get to.
Yes.
Let's talk about some of the news of the past week. It was just kind of a busy week. First off, the fact that that Major League Baseball sets the calendar for the offseason, and they are looking at the calendar thinking, how can we get more people to be invested in our sport in the offseason? NBA dominates the offseason. NFL, in a lot of ways, dominates the offseason with free agency and the draft. How can we get people to be more excited about the MLB offseason? Oh, man. How about we throw the 2 of the most important days of the offseason, not just on the same day, but on a Friday?
I'm not going to say that it makes sense because it surely doesn't. I'm not going to say that I understand it because I absolutely do not.
Yeah, it's the start of the international signing period. New international signing period was Friday, and also the deadline day for teams to decide on deals with their arbitration-eligible players before they end up going to arbitration. So 2 things that obviously are not going to be huge eyeball getters. They're not going to lead SportsCenter, but I don't know, maybe not make them on a Friday? Is that a little...
And I'm not even going to go on my rant about how baseball contracts make no sense and how trying to explain what arbitration-eligible players and Super 2 players and all that means to somebody would be nearly impossible. I'm not even going to go into that rant.
Good luck explaining that to somebody who doesn't know baseball, doesn't watch
I
baseball.
tried to explain it to myself in my own head to understand it, and it's really difficult.
Yeah, it is.
To understand all of these really weird contracts that Major League Baseball has and the arbitration and this and that. I mean, we have fans asking us, rightfully so, when the Orioles, say, for example, did not come to an agreement with Anthony Santander that we'll get to. We had fans saying, well, what does this mean for Anthony Santander?
Is he no longer a member of the
team? Is he a free agent?
Yeah.
Is he this? Is he that? And it is understandably very difficult to understand.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's start with the news that the Orioles came to agreements with 17 international amateurs. And these are 17 guys who are typically between 16 and 17 years old. I think the oldest guy was maybe 20. I'm not sure. I'd have to look back at the list. But it's a lot of names that essentially you're going to hear now, and then you're going to file away in your brain for a few years, because a lot of these guys are not going to make it to the minor league system to the United States. They're going to be playing in the Dominican Summer League for the most part for the next couple years at least, because they're just not ready at this point. They're 16 years old. What were you doing at 16 years old? I was
not getting signed by the Orioles.
Looking for a prom date, I think is mostly
Yep.
what I was doing at 16 years old. So let's talk about the two guys at the top of this class, because this was a major signing period for the Orioles, what Michael Elias called a gigantic step. And they signed fewer guys on Friday than they did on the first day of the international signing period back in 2019, back on July 2nd, J2. But the quality of the top two guys was definitely higher than any of the guys that they had signed back on J2 2019.
Yeah, and let me just start by saying that it is incredibly important that the Orioles are now getting into this market. I can't emphasize enough the fact that missing out on this is detrimental to the team, and it's really important that Michael Elias and Kobe Perez are starting to make a bigger splash in this market. I mean, you look around Major League Baseball, and there are teams that are literally built around this international signing period. You can look at the Washington Nationals, who are led by guys like Juan Soto and Victor Robles. Look at the Atlanta Braves. Maybe that's not the best example given their fines, but they've still got guys like Ronald Acuna, Ozzie Albies. They are built by those international signing period guys, and here's two that could be huge for the Orioles in Samuel Basallo and Michael Hernandez. Both of them, I think, they'll probably be in the Orioles' top 30 prospects pretty soon. We're not sure exactly where they will be slotted yet, but you have to imagine that these two guys would be somewhere near the top. I don't know if they'll be top 10, but maybe over the next few years, they'll start to work their way up the board. Michael Hernandez especially was already the number 30 international prospect, according to MLB Pipeline, and the Orioles scooped him up.
Yeah, so $1.3 million for Samuel Basallo. That is an all-time record for the Orioles in terms of money being spent on a single international amateur. He is a catcher from the Dominican Republic. And then right behind him, Michael Hernandez, $1.2 million, shortstop from Venezuela. I love how the Orioles went with position players for the vast majority because, and this is something that we should have seen coming because Michael Elias has talked about how a lot of the superstar players in Major League Baseball, first off, a lot of them came over in the international signing period. A lot of them were international signings. And the fact that the Orioles had not been players in this market pretty much prior to this, they had, guys here and there. They had their Jonathan Scopes, but they did not have a presence there in the international market and especially the Latin market. So to build a presence there was huge because you can not only get a superstar player, but also look at the kind of superstar players that you have. You mentioned Victor Robles, Juan Soto, Vlad Guerrero with the Toronto Blue Jays.
Yep.
Buffalo Blue Jays, rather. And you look at a lot of these players, very few of them are pitchers for whatever reason. And part of it is, Michael Elias did say that pitchers develop later. As they get older, it's a skill that takes a little bit more time to develop. And a lot of times you just end up seeing these shortstops, these catchers who are supremely athletic. They burst onto the scene at 15, 16 years old. Teams go and grab them, and then they turn out to be budding superstars at the major league level. So the Orioles went with 15 position players to 2 pitchers, and it also goes hand in hand with what they have in their system. The Orioles system, we've talked about a million times on this podcast, at this point is deeper in terms of pitching than it is at the position players. They do have some guys, some shortstop, middle infield prospects with Jordan Westberg and Gunnar Henderson and Taran Vavra, but they don't have a ton of those guys. Probably they don't have enough of those guys. So to get those guys in the system now is a big step for them.
Well, no matter what, you're adding talent.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you can take away the positions, you can take away anything else. It certainly helps you to add talent to your prospect pool, as simple as that sounds. But to go back to your point about pitchers, I mean, you could be a 16-year-old pitcher throwing 75 miles an hour. And then by the time you're 17, you could be throwing 85.
Yeah.
So that can drastically change, and it can drastically change what kind of prospects teams think you might be. But these two guys especially, and Samuel Basallo and Michael Hernandez, really exciting prospects. I mean, you look at Hernandez especially, he's probably the one that I'm most excited about. He's getting comparisons, at least with his body type, to Alex Rodriguez and Carlos Correa.
Yeah, now way away, obviously.
A long ways away, yes. But the thing that's exciting, at least to me, about Hernandez that I saw, pretty much all of his scouting reports say that he's smooth, which is awesome for a 16-year-old shortstop. I mean, the swing is smooth, the defensive mechanics are smooth, and if the mechanics are smooth, I mean, if he's got that just kind of raw potential, the mechanics are usually the first thing that you have to work on. So the fact that the mechanics are already smooth and they're already there, that's really encouraging for a young shortstop, especially who has the body type of an Alex Rodriguez, Carlos Correa. So I think Hernandez could be a really exciting shortstop prospect in a few years.
And of those 17 guys, I think 4 maybe were catchers, which I saw a lot of comments. Why do we need catchers? Adley Rutschman. Yeah, obviously, Adley Rutschman is going to be the catcher of the future, most likely in Baltimore. But also, Adley Rutschman is 22 at this point. These guys are 16.
Right.
Adley Rutschman is going to be in the major leagues way before these guys.
Right.
Adley Rutschman could be on his second contract by the time these guys are in AAA. So,
right.
First off, obviously there is not an overlap in terms of the age there. So these guys are way younger, so consider them in a totally different class. It's not like the Orioles went out and drafted somebody out of college, number 1 overall, who was another catcher, and that ended up being a problem.
And they probably won't even hit the minor leagues for another 2 years, at least.
Most likely. And another thing is they may not stick a catcher. I think a lot of times, all the guys that were listed were pretty much shortstop, catcher. They weren't listed as third base because they're so raw at this point. You stick them at shortstop until they can't play it, until either they outgrow the position or they realize that, they are not laterally quick enough to do it. So maybe a lot of these catchers could end up being a corner outfielder, could end up being a first baseman. They could Bryce Harper and turn into a right fielder, even despite playing catcher. So
Kyle Schwarber and turn into a left fielder. It happens.
Yeah. So these guys are way away from being in the big leagues. So, they are probably not going to stick at their original position. So you're getting these raw, talented athletes at this point and just hoping that they turn into something.
Right. And Basallo especially is one of those guys who will probably just size out of the catcher position.
Yeah.
He'll probably
He's
just
big.
end up being a little bit too big because he's big now and he's 17.
Yeah, 6'3", almost 200 pounds.
Yeah. So he will probably end up being a first baseman or maybe a bigger third baseman like Vlad Guerrero Jr. I would imagine Basallo probably goes to first base at some point in the minor leagues.
And then in terms of one more thing I'll say about the money that they spent there, another reason that we did not see so many guys signed by the team is because you only have a certain amount of money that you can spend in this signing period. Looking at you. You can only spend, I think it's around $6 million total for the Orioles, and it depends on the team how much you're able to sign. So when you go out and sign 2 guys for $1.3 and $1.2 million, that just means you don't have money to spend on the other guys. So you just cannot sign as many guys. But it was important that they were going out and signing the top guys this year. And you talked about the depth. These guys, it's just good to add these guys talent-wise. And that was clearly the intention in 2019. It was just to get guys in the system at the very least. And it's clearly the intention when Mike Elias gets a player from the Dominican Summer League thrown in one of his trades. It's because he just wants to increase the talent level there. And these guys are so young, so raw. You want to get a top guy, but that being said, there's a good chance that one of the non-top guys, one of the $300,000 signings, might turn into a player who could make his major league debut at some point.
Right, and they're not ready to be the Yankees in the international signing period and sign
takes years.
Jason Dominguez for $5.5 million and sign like 2 other players.
Yeah, they're scouting these kids when they're like 12.
Right, and the Orioles are pretty new at this.
Yeah.
They are pretty new into the international market, so you need more depth.
Yeah.
You can't go out and build a base of these guys and say, okay, we have one guy who we signed for $5 million and he's going to just go out and like throw fly balls to himself, apparently, or something like that. You need depth in this market, and that's what the Orioles are doing. I think a few years down the line, maybe they'll start to sign some guys for $2 million, somewhere around there. Maybe they'll get some of the higher end guys. But for right now, you need more depth.
Yeah. All right. What should we talk about next, Brendan? We got some
There's
more.
a lot to get to.
There is a lot to get to. Let's talk about Brandon Klein real quick.
Yeah.
Because I just wanted to touch on what a great story he was. He announced his retirement at the end of last week, 29 years old. Frankly, I was a little bit surprised that he is calling it a career just because in 3 games last year, small sample size, he only gave up the 1 earned run. But the year before, when he made his major league debut in 2019, he certainly struggled with the Orioles. 5.8 ERA, I believe, with the O's.
5.48.
5.48. So, he struggled out of the bullpen. But Brandon Klein, what a fun story he was and a great story. He was a second-round pick, went to UVA, grew up in Frederick, was an Orioles fan, from the beginning. He had his mom at his first game. And then he gets drafted, I believe, in the same draft that Kevin Gausman got drafted in.
Yeah, he was a second rounder in 2012.
So he was right after him, had obviously very high expectations, and then injuries just totally derailed him. And I believe he had Tommy John at some point.
Yes, he did.
And just could not get his fastball up to the same velocity that it was. He was expected to be a starter, had to move to the bullpen, then kind of had the second career in the bullpen in Bowie and Norfolk, and is able to make his major league debut. And the fact that he did not turn into a productive major leaguer, that's not as important as the fact that he was able to get there, make his major league debut with his hometown Orioles, and just be a great story.
Yeah, you have to imagine it was almost a love-hate relationship with baseball. I mean, this guy, his first injury was a broken right fibula, and then he had 3 separate elbow surgeries, including a complete Tommy John reconstruction. That is a lot. That is probably even one of those injuries knocks a guy off of his path when he's in the minor leagues. So the fact that Brandon Klein went through all of those injuries and was still able to make his debut with the team that he grew up rooting for, you can't not root for Brandon Klein and be proud of the fact that he made 37 appearances for the O's in 2019 and 2020. The fact that he made one of those appearances is awesome.
Absolutely. So 29 years old, the Orioles had placed him on waivers. He cleared waivers back in December, and then he elected free agency and then just decided to call it a career. So we wish him the best, certainly in retirement, and I know that he will always be welcome back in Birdland. All right, what else should we get to? Thomas Eshelman?
Yep.
Let's talk about Thomas Eshelman because we have another member of the Orioles bullpen, sometimes member of the starting rotation, who is returning. Thomas Eshelman went the same kind of path as Brandon Klein, elected free agency after he was placed on waivers. And I was honestly a little bit surprised that he was placed on waivers the first time. And I was surprised because he had a sub-4 ERA bouncing back and forth between the rotation and the bullpen in 2020. I thought he showed some flashes. He's not a guy who has great stuff, so I don't know where his role will be long-term, but he returns to the Orioles on a minor league deal. Why not get him back in the fold?
Well, I think Thomas Eshelman probably best projects as an innings eater for the Orioles. I don't see him joining the fold in the starting rotation, more than likely, because I think if you're the O's heading into 2021, you would probably like another veteran starter at the back end of the rotation. I don't think that that's Eshelman. And as you go later in the season, I would imagine that you probably don't want Eshelman taking away starts from some of the prospects that might get called up this year. So I don't think Eshelman is going to be a rotation guy. But I think realistically, he will probably be a long reliever. If somebody gets knocked out in the second or third inning, a starter, you bring Thomas Eshelman in just to eat some innings in the middle of a game. If there's an injury to a starter, I could see Eshelman bumping into the starting rotation temporarily. He's, like you said, he doesn't have amazing stuff. I don't see him as a high-impact starter for the O's. But if you need him to start, he can. And if you don't, then he can be an innings eater out of the bullpen.
Yeah, I think he fits into the same category as some of the fringe starters that
Asher Wojciechowski,
though I think he's less likely to be a starter again with the Orioles in the future just because of the struggles that he had in 2020. But I think that Cole Stewart is going to fit into that category if they decide to bring him back. Guys,
maybe Bruce Zimmerman,
guys on these minor league deals that are just trying to impress. And sometimes you end up getting a John Means out of that situation, somebody who just shows up in camp and dominates, and out of nowhere, he ends up being a solid starter for you. But he's just one of the guys that is going to be competing, I think, for a roster spot come spring training. All right.
Next up, we're
Arbitration?
flying through these.
We are flying through
It's funny.
these. Quick hits.
It feels like every podcast we're trying to, figure out what piece of Orioles news we're going to talk about.
And then we just got news
on this
dumped.
podcast. It's just news.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we're rolling through it.
I feel like we're on Hot Stove on like MLB Network or something.
Yeah.
You know?
That's
All right.
same thing.
Let's talk about arbitration. Yeah, I mean, same quality.
Right.
Production quality.
I'd have to agree.
Right there.
Yeah.
Let's talk about arbitration real quick.
Yes.
Two guys that coming into Friday, the Orioles had to agree to terms with them or else they would head to arbitration. Trey Mancini, Anthony Santander. Trey Mancini, the deal got done. Same exact terms as 2020, $4.75 million. Unfortunately, was not able to get a pay bump because he didn't play a game in 2020. But good that they did not. This was not a protracted negotiations. It did not have to head to arbitration with Trey Mancini. And then Anthony Santander, not reaching an agreement with the Orioles. They say they have a file and go policy. So essentially, they sent in the number that they wanted to sign him for. I believe it was reported by Mark Feinsand as a little bit more than $2 million. Santander was looking for maybe a little bit closer to $3 million. Arbiter's going to look at these two numbers and decide which one he wants to go with.
Well, starting with Trey Mancini, I was a little surprised that they didn't bump up his salary just a little bit because it's the next year of potential arbitration. However, I'm glad that they didn't knock it down by saying, maybe your production in 2021 won't be the same as what it could have been in 2020, whatever. So I think it's probably fair that the number stayed the same with Trey Mancini. For Anthony Santander, I want to clarify again. This does not mean that Anthony Santander is a free agent. He is still on the Orioles, and hopefully when this arbitration hearing happens, they will come to an agreement. They will figure out some salary for next season, and Anthony Santander will be back with the club. But Anthony Santander, not a free agent. He's not open to negotiate with other teams. He is still only negotiating with the Orioles. I wanted to clarify because I was confused about it. The whole arbitration deadline mess is just complicated. So Anthony Santander, still with the Orioles, just needs to negotiate a salary for next year.
I think he still has an extra 3 years in arbitration under team control.
He's still arbitration eligible for another few years. So
Yeah.
this is probably their first of a few arbitration, negotiations.
Absolutely. And for whatever he's going to get, even if it is the number he wants, which is closer to $3 million, we have seen that's going to be a bargain for Anthony Santander. Just another bargain on this team where because of his age, because of his experience level, they are getting more than they are paying for Anthony Santander. All right, that wraps up the arbitration standpoint. I think I'm out of breath at this point. What should we talk about next, Brendan?
Well, before we move on from arbitration, I just want to add that it kind of
More arbitration notes.
It says something about the state of Major League Baseball and kind of how teams have to be more careful with money after last season, I think. But Anthony Santander will come to some kind of agreement, but the Orioles, like many teams across the league, just being careful with how their money is being spent.
The All-Arbitration podcast.
Yes.
Let's talk more arbitration numbers. All right. Let's talk about the shortstop market, Brendan.
Let's do it.
We teased it in the caption, so I figure we have to get to it at some point. The good people have tuned in for this discussion. And this is a discussion that has been had around the Orioles Twitter, around MASNsports.com. What should the Orioles do at shortstop? Should they go out and sign a free agent? This has been an especially slow free agent market around baseball. The biggest names, almost all of them, are still on the board at every position. Somebody tweeted out, I can't remember who, they said biggest free agent still available at every position, and I was like, okay, cool. So the same exact list could have been tweeted in November.
Right.
Trevor Bauer's still out there. JT Realmuto's still out there. Didi Gregorius is still out there.
I mean, the big names that have been signed are really DJ LeMahieu,
Yep.
Liam Hendricks, and James McCann.
Yeah, at this point, can you think of somebody else who, besides Marcus Stroman returning to the Mets? And
Unless we're really missing somebody.
yeah, I mean, we probably are. But
I mean, the Padres made a few big trades, but that
Yeah.
wasn't free agent signings.
no. They did sign some people. But anyway, This has been a slow market.
Yes.
And so all of the
The
names,
fact that we're not sure, it's slow.
almost all of the names that were on the market back in November are still on the market. So I don't think the Orioles are going to go out and get Didi Gregorius. I don't think, I'm sorry, I don't think they're going to go out and get Andrelton Simmons.
I will cry myself to sleep.
But the need is still there for a shortstop. And one intriguing name that is out there is Jonathan Villar, former Orioles infielder himself. Of course, came over in the Jonathan Scope trade. Jonathan Scope is still out there as well.
Bring him home.
It just doesn't make much sense. I don't
Well,
think. The reason I'll say one thing about
Someone's
Jonathan
a party
Scope,
pooper over there.
he's more of a second baseman. I think that they are, if they bring back Hanser Alberto, they'll stick him at second, most likely. They could. Okay. Just
Party
going.
pooper.
All right. In terms of Jonathan Villar, though,
Yes.
I think he makes sense for some reasons. The former connection is there. The fact that he's a former Oriole under Mike Elias. The fact that he can play shortstop, and I think that they will need somebody there if Richie Martin is not ready to be an everyday major leaguer again in 2021. But the concerns that we voiced about Jonathan Villar when he was with the Orioles and when he was traded by the Orioles are still there. The defense is still not great. He takes a lot of risks on the base paths, even though he's very fast and was a 40 stolen base guy a couple years ago with the O's. Takes a lot of risks there and is just not the most consistent guy.
He's a free swinger.
He is a very free swinger.
Yeah.
Doesn't take a whole lot of walks.
No. Not his forte.
No. But is the potential production to you, Brendan, worth bringing him in?
Yes, and I'll give you a big reason why.
Okay.
And that reason is that he was bad in 2020, and I think that really drove down his market value.
Yep.
I think what you can get Jonathan Villar for right now after his 2020 season is probably going to be a pretty good deal. His best career numbers are with the Orioles, but last year he hit .232 with 2 home runs, 15 RBIs. He had more stolen bases than RBIs. He had 16 stolen bases, 15 RBIs, and a .593 OPS.
I looked that up, by the way, how many guys have had more stolen bases than RBIs. It was a very short list.
I can imagine so.
It was like Roman Quinn with the Phillies, Adalberto Mondesi with the Royals, and Jonathan Villar.
Yeah.
It's like it.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Hit just 188 for the Blue Jays after he was traded to Toronto at the deadline as a piece that they were hoping would help lead them to the playoffs. So I think Villar, you can probably get him for a little bit of a steal on the free agent market right now. But like I said, his best numbers were with the Orioles. He has a .270 career average, which is the highest of his career, a .438 slugging percentage, highest of his career, .777 OPS, highest of his career. So you would be bringing him back to Camden Yards where he has his best numbers. He was a big piece in 2019. He played in all 162 games, split pretty evenly between second base and shortstop. I think he would probably play shortstop, but hey, if Richie Martin plays pretty well, you could also bump him over to second base if needed. We'll see where Rylan Bannon potentially gets called up to play.
Yeah, we'll see if Alberto comes back.
There could be a lot of moving pieces, but I also see him in a similar light to Yomer Sanchez. They're different players because Sanchez gives you a lot of value defensively, where Villar probably gives you more value offensively, but they're similar in that you can probably bump them pretty much anywhere in the infield, and they will be able to start for you somewhere. Yeah. I think Sanchez will probably start at either third base or second base, where Villar would potentially start at second base or shortstop. But it's good value because he was bad in 2020. And I think that's really the reason that you would be looking at Villar. If he was good last year, he probably goes to a better team for a higher salary.
And that's exactly what Mike Elias is trying to do in free agency, is find guys who maybe are coming off down years, maybe the market just has left them for whatever reason. He's trying to bring them in most cases, turn them into trade pieces. And let's be honest, if they were to bring back Jonathan Villar, they would be just getting him ready to trade him at this point, which is what they're going to be doing with most free agents. It's what they did with Tommy Malone. It's what they did with Wade LeBlanc. They weren't able to trade him because of injuries, but it's what they did with Jose Iglesias. So they are just, he's 29 years old, Villar is. If they brought him in, it would probably be on a 1-year deal, hoping that they can trade him by the trade deadline. So that's most likely what the interest would be from Mike Elias's perspective. But then you have to look at, with every single free agent that comes into this Orioles team, would they be blocking somebody younger? And in this case, this is one of the rare spots in the roster where I don't think that's the case yet. Outfield, you're not going to bring in, I mean, maybe they bring in Puig as they've been connected to him, but I think odds are they're not going to bring in an outfielder in free agency because they don't want to block Austin Hayes, Cedric Mullins, Anthony Santander, Yusniel Diaz. In the starting rotation, they could bring in somebody, but they're not going to bring in somebody for 2 or 3 years because they don't want to impede the progress of Alexander Wells, of Zach Lather, of Michael Baumann, of Bruce Zimmerman, even of Dean Kramer and Keegan Aiken. This is one of those spots in the infield where you don't have an immediate replacement. You don't have a young guy who is ready to make his major league debut and make contributions yet. So this is one of the spots I think you could sign somebody for 1 year. He could, if he's not tradable by the trade deadline, in theory, he could stick with you for the entire 2021 season, and he is not going to be impeding the progress. That being said, if Richie Martin has an outstanding camp, if Richie Martin looks great and ready to go, and all of a sudden, broken wrist, he is a totally different player and he's ready to be an everyday major leaguer, that changes the equation. But at this point, the signs are not pointing to that. So I think if they were to bring in Jonathan Villar or somebody of that ilk on a 1-year deal, he's not blocking anybody.
Yeah, we have a comment on YouTube that says, what about Gunnar? The prospects that the Orioles have at shortstop just aren't going to be ready for a few years. No. Gunnar Henderson is probably 2 or 3 years away from the major league level. Jordan Westberg is probably 2 or 3 years away. So they're good prospects, but they just still need time to develop in the minors. We have another comment on YouTube, thanks for following along, that says VR is a monster, maybe the best option available. So, Paul, I will ask you, is VR the best option at shortstop available within the price range?
Yeah, right. Not
a Didi Gregorius or Andrelton Simmons. Is there anybody in that price range that you think might be even a better option than Jonathan VR?
We have heard Rock Kabako mention the name of Freddie Galvis, 31 years old, right in that same age range as where they got Jose Iglesias. And he fits the Jose Iglesias mold more than Jonathan VR does. I think VR is less of a defensive, more offensive power guy than Iglesias. Freddie Galvis is more in the realm of Iglesias in that he is a glove-first player. So you would be signing him hoping that he can produce a little bit at the plate, but mostly just show that he is still a very good defensive shortstop. You start him every day, you trade him by the trade deadline.
Yeah. So not an amazing piece, Freddie Galvis, but he's probably going to hit around 250, 240 and give you some solid production at shortstop. Yeah. It's not going to be a big, flashy signing, but maybe Freddie Galvis is somebody that you can sign and deal. He was dealt at the 2019 trade deadline when the Blue Jays signed him before the season and then traded him to Cincinnati. So maybe the Orioles could do a similar thing in 2021. But I would agree with you. I think Freddie Galvis is probably the other name that jumps out. Personally, I'd almost rather have VR because I think VR gives you a little bit more production offensively, especially on the base paths. And VR is a little bit of a worse defender, but I think you can probably keep VR between shortstop and second base, knowing that you have some other solid defenders in the infield, especially with Yolmer Sanchez.
Don't play him in center field like the Marlins did last year.
Yeah, do not play him in center field. I don't think that's a concern for the
Orioles.
Don't
know why they did that, but the Marlins did it.
Well, sometimes the Marlins just needed players last year.
Yeah, true.
So I would not put Jonathan VR in center field, but I think you could make a case that Jonathan VR makes the most sense out of guys remaining. Him and Freddie Galvis are the two that I would say make the most sense.
And we saw what the league still thinks of him by the fact that he was traded not just once by the Orioles before the 2020 season, but at midseason, as you mentioned, the August 31st trade deadline. Ended up going to a team that was a contender and was dealt for a pretty solid prospect, I believe, in that deal. So you know that the league still has some thinking of him at this point. Even coming off that down year, we just saw him traded for 2 prospects in back-to-back trades. So the precedent is there for a Jonathan VR trade where you could net somebody. I think VR would probably like to come back. I think he liked his experience here, and I think teammates liked him.
Put up his best numbers here.
Absolutely. And he's coming to a hitter's park that suited him very well. and he is probably going to get the same freedom on the base paths that he had in Baltimore the first time. He's probably, if he signs with a contender, they might say, hey, maybe don't try running on that 0-2 count every time, just cool it just a little bit. So I think that there is a chance that he comes back. That being said, it's just the fact that they have had contact with him and the fact that they have a history with him does not mean it's a certainty by any stretch. And I think there are so many. It is January 19th. Teams are reporting for spring training, supposed to be in less than a month, and you still have so many top free agents out there in the market. I think the Orioles will be patient in this market and wait for the market to develop. Wait for the top guys like a Simmons and like a Didi Gregorius to sign before they decide, okay, how much would a Jonathan Villar cost? How much would a Freddie Galvis cost? Let's sort through the numbers and let's sign somebody, bring him into Sarasota.
Yeah, maybe Mike Elias just says, I'll wait to make sure that no other team feels like signing you, and then he'll say, I have $2. Come to play for the Orioles. And
I think there's a minimum there, Brendan.
I don't know. I think it's a pretty good strategy, though.
I would play for $2. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, it'd probably be overpay for your value there, Paul.
That's wow. All right. Are we getting any more comments? I'm not able to read too many of the comments as well on YouTube. So thank you for commenting along. I can't read them. Brendan can.
Yes, we are. We're getting a lot of comments. One comment says that Jonathan Villar carried the O's for a little bit. I don't know if I would necessarily say carried, but he was an important part of the team.
Carried.
It's 162 games. 162 games played.
Yeah.
That's really solid. He was a fixture in the lineup. We have another comment saying, hope Diaz turns it around. I like him. We've mentioned on previous podcasts that we're
Pasta cast.
Wow.
We're
English
right
is
in the
hard
kitchen.
Sometimes.
We
are.
That's our next podcast. A pasta.
It's just us cooking pasta. Be sure to tune in. We mentioned on a previous pasta cast that Yusniel Diaz could debut this year. We've noted his struggles in the minors, but we are hoping that Yusniel Diaz turns it around in 2021, and I think it's a real possibility that we could see him in the Orioles lineup at the second half of this year.
And I think it's less, this is a semantics argument, but I think it's less turning around. He was great from what we heard. Mike Elias was praising in him and the work that he did at the alternate site at Bowie, and he said really the only reason he didn't debut was they wanted to get extended looks at other guys. The fact that Cedric Mullins was playing so well, you couldn't bump him out of Bowie. The fact that Austin Hayes came back from the injury on fire and he was great and they wanted to see him in a corner outfield. The fact that DJ Stewart went through that hot stretch. So I think really the only reason Yusniel Diaz didn't make his major league debut was they wanted to see other guys. So maybe not turn things around, but kind of finish his development. And I think it was a good sign that the Orioles had a mini camp and he was invited to that outfielders mini camp as well. They want to see what they have in him. They want to see if he can come into Sarasota in less than a month and make a push to make the opening day roster. Again, we think he's probably going to be added to the Major League roster, make his debut maybe a month or two into the season, but he is close. He is close to the bigs.
Yeah, and one more question we've got on YouTube. It says, who will have a breakout season this year?
You will, Brendan.
I think it'll be me. I'm going to go with Austin Hayes. We haven't seen a full healthy season from Austin Hayes yet, so I'm going to cross my fingers and hope that he stays healthy for 2021. And I think if he does, we will see, hopefully, a full productive season out of Austin Hayes because he's showed really good flashes. And I think if he's able to stay healthy for a season, even though his production might not be a ton better than it was in 2019 or 2020, if we see it over a full healthy season, that could be like a breakout for Austin Hayes. So that's my answer.
I think a low-key storyline coming into the year is going to be where he plays, too.
Yep.
Is he going to be trusted in center field the entire time? He's made some spectacular plays there.
Little battle with Cedric Mullins there.
Yeah, and Elias has said Yusniel Diaz is capable of playing all three outfield spots, which I thought was a little surprising because I thought they would want to try him more in a corner outfield spot, maybe DH him a little bit. So,
well, capable of playing all three outfield spots is different from do you want him playing center field when you have Cedric Mullins or Austin Hayes there?
That's the question. Is he going to be is Yusniel Diaz going to be taking innings away from Austin Hayes in center?
Yeah.
I don't know if the team wants to do that at this point.
Right.
But they do want to see what they have in him in center field as well.
Right.
And then we have not even talked about Ryan McKenna, who played center field his entire 2019 season pretty much with Bowie. Are they going to put him in center field, move Austin Hayes to a corner, and have Cedric Mullins sitting on the bench one day if everybody's healthy? Are they going to be willing to do that just to see what they have in McKenna?
Right. So, Paul, who is your breakout player for next season? Breakout candidate?
Can't say Ryan Mountcastle because he's already broken out. I think that's, even though he could still win Rookie of the Year, technically, because he did not play enough games, he's still eligible to win Rookie of the Year in the 2021 season.
My breakout player, Adley Rutschman. All right. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We have to end every podcast with that now, too.
Yeah.
Adley Rutschman, thanks, everybody.
Thanks for coming. All right.
You got to name drop him at least once. I think my breakout player is a guy that has not made his major league debut yet. I'm going to go with Zach Lowther. I think this guy's going to be a stud. I'm probably more bullish on Zach Lowther than some others, but I think Lowther has the potential to be a fixture in the rotation. We saw what Dean Kramer did in just 4 starts last year. I think Lowther, you look at his production at Bowie in the 2019 season, you look at the stuff, he has multiple good pitches, like plus pitches. I think he's going to make his major league debut probably before the middle of the year. He's going to be right there with Alexander Wells and Michael Baumann in terms of guys that are going to be starting. New dad. I think Zach Lowther is going to have some new dad strength. Dad strength. And I think that I'm looking for him. But, of course, he's going to be a rookie, so no pressure on the guy.
No pressure. He is just Paul's breakout candidate for 2021.
Okay, that's right. I'm just saying let's keep an eye on him. In terms of guys already on the roster, I mean, it's tough because Santander, you can't put him in that category.
Full season Ryan Mountcastle?
Yeah,
I don't know if
he's
that
already
counts.
broken out. Yeah.
Right.
So I think Austin Hayes fits in that category. And again, like Dean Kramer, I think is a breakout candidate, but I thought that he made such a good impression his first 3 starts. So I can't really call him a breakout candidate because he was outstanding.
Right. I just have to acknowledge that I am being attacked in our YouTube comments.
What else is
somebody is all caps. Hi, Jake. He says, "You're looking at my comments. I see you looking at them." Guy in the blue shirt. And then
We're both wearing blue shirts.
And then he says, "Okay, guy in the blue shirt, we're at war."
Wow.
Because I did not read out his question.
You're on your
Sorry,
own here.
Jake.
You are on your own here. All right. Anything else we want to talk about? I think that just about does it.
I think that just about does it. Adley Rutschman, 2021. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Every one of our podcasts will include a draft from now on. We're going to be drafting whatever you want.
Next week on the
breakfast
Pasta
foods,
Cast. On the Pasta Cast next week,
drafting-
we'll be drafting pasta.
First overall pick.
Got to be penne.
Got to be penne pasta. I think easily has to be the first
Tricolor
overall pick.
Rotini probably goes second.
It's close.
Oh,
That's
we'll
close.
see. Gonna be a toss-up.
Mezza penne, like the little pennes.
This is the content the Orioles fans sign up for.
This is
Us talking about pasta.
the Pasta Cast.
We're too close to our kitchen. That's why we've just got pasta on the mind.
Next podcast, we're going to have somebody back there making food for us.
That'd be great.
All right.
Really good content.
Thanks so much for tuning in. This podcast got off the rails real quick. But, of course, be sure to subscribe, rate, review, all that stuff. Let us know if we should do a Pasta Cast. He's Brendan Mortensen, at Brendan Morty on Twitter. I am at Paul Mancano on Twitter. And, of course, be sure to follow MASN Orioles. If you don't follow MASN Orioles, what are you doing?
What are you doing?
What are you doing?
How'd you even find us?
That's a great question, actually. Thanks so much for tuning in. And thanks, of course, to Hannah Broder behind the scenes, as always. And thanks to Connor Newcomb for joining us on today's episode. And thanks to you. We'll see you later.